Welcome to episode 223 of CppCast, the first podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. I'm your host, Rob Burping, joined by my co-host, Jason Turner. Jason, how's it going today?
I'm all right, Rob. You just said episode 223 and it reminded me that I am getting perilously close to episode 200 of C++ Weekly.
Yeah, we're only like 20 ahead of you now, right?
Yeah, I'm at 193, I think, so I've got 7 left, and yeah.
Okay.
Episode 200 will be basically December 30th. It'll be the end of the year. Just rounded out perfectly here.
So I was looking at it recently to see like how many episodes we're averaging a year, and we usually seem to miss about 4 or 5. Yeah. So we probably still might have like 3 or 4 years until you catch up, maybe even 5 years. Yeah. You'll just keep getting closer and closer.
Yeah.
At the top of our episode, I'd like to read a piece of feedback. This week I got an email from Eric Richardson. It's a long email, so I'm just going to read part of it, but he says, Rob and Jason, I started a new job in February and began listening to your podcast on my daily commute. About a month ago, I started looking around for local C++ user groups, but failed to find one in the Maryland, D.C. area. After posting about potentially starting my own on the Slack local groups channel, I got some encouragement from John Kolb, Phil Nash, and Jens Veller. John also mentioned that Bob Stiegel from the C++ committee was looking to start one in the area. If I was all the way caught up with your podcast, I would recognize his name, but at the time I hadn't gotten to that episode yet. To keep it short, he started the Maryland C++ user group, which is CPP Maryland, and I will post a link to that on meetup.com in the show notes. And he did reach out to Bob Stiegel, who's helping him run it. And their first meeting is going to be Wednesday, December 4th. So if you're in the Maryland, Washington, D.C. area and you are listening to this podcast, you should definitely go check out their first user group meeting on December 4th. And I think I have it up. They're going to be talking about linear algebra and the ranges in C++ 20.
And in that general area, and I know it's an area that's hard to navigate with lots of traffic,
Yeah.
The Beltway, kind of northern Beltway area, but that there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of C++ programmers in that area because of all the government contracting.
Yeah.
Easy.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully they'll get some people coming to this and be able to start to build a community there. That'd be great.
Well, it looks like they already have 62 members on the user group.
Wow.
So they already managed to find some people. I mean, they haven't had a meeting yet. So
right. No.
That's emailed me recently. And to have that many people signed up before the user group even has a meeting seems promising.
It does. That sounds great. Yeah, hopefully they'll get some traction.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'd love to hear your thoughts about the show. You can always reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, or email us at feedback@cppcast.com. And don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes and subscribe on YouTube. Joining us today is Timur Doumler. Timur is a C++ developer specializing in audio and music technology, active member of the ISO C++ committee, and part of the Include C++ team. He is passionate about building communities, clean code, good tools, and the evolution of C++. Timur, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So before we started recording, you mentioned that you've been traveling for at least 3 weeks now, but I think you and I have basically been at every conference that I've been to this year. We've been to at the same time.
That might be right, yes.
You were at Core C++.
Yes.
Did you go to TechTown?
I did not go to TechTown.
Oh, okay.
I did go to Aspen and C++ Now. I was at CppCon. I was at CPP on C.
Oh, C++. Yeah, okay, yeah. And
that's it.
CppCon, yeah. I guess only 3 conferences this year
right.
so far.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
So, yeah, the last 3 weeks were a bit crazy. So it started with C++ Russia in St. Petersburg, which had a really nice lineup this year. I mean, obviously for me it's special because I'm from St. Petersburg, but they are more and more like doing like a really international program with lots of like English speaking kind of very well-known speakers, really good program. Then I traveled from there to Belfast where we had a C++ meeting, committee meeting. Then immediately following the meeting, we had a mini ACCU conference also in Belfast, which was Monday, Tuesday. And today I just arrived in Berlin for meeting C++, which starts tomorrow.
And did you speak at the ACCU meeting also?
Yeah. I had a talk there about class template argument deduction.
Okay.
Yeah, so here I'm giving a talk about, tomorrow actually, about kind of all the new stuff in C++20, like an overview, or kind of the smaller little language features. Yeah, so yeah, really excited about that.
Wow.
Awesome.
But a bit too much traveling, so I definitely need to cut down on the conferences next year and actually, get some work done.
Yeah, yes, I've been thinking about what conferences I'll be going to next year, and I've heard other people on Twitter talking about, going to the conferences that, like having to decide which conferences you go to. You can't go to all of them all of the time.
Yeah, I learned this year that this is completely infeasible, and yeah, you need to choose.
Yeah. Okay, well, Timur, we want to definitely talk to you about the Belfast trip report, Belfast meeting last week. Could you maybe start off by giving us some of your highlights to come out of that meeting?
Sure. So it was a bit of a weird one. I think it was my meeting number 9 or 10. And usually there's some big features happening or some drama happening, like last time we pulled contracts
Right.
and things like that. This time it was very different because we're now in the phase where we are just kind of bug fixing. So we released the committee draft for CPC20 at the last meeting in July. So now we are just processing what we call national body comments, which are basically bug reports. And we have this meeting and the next meeting in Prague just basically to fix these bug reports and finalize CPC20. So it was nothing really big happened. It was just a lot of kind of collective bug fixing. But I have to say that some of these bug fixes resulted in interesting fixes. Like, I think my highlight was there was one comment that the way we introduced class type as non-type template parameters via the spaceship operator, where you have like have a defaulted operator equals didn't quite work. The resolution is really interesting. So now we actually completely redesigned how non-type template parameter will work.
Oh.
So the first big news is we're going to get in C++20 floats and doubles as non-type template parameters.
And so currently only integral types and
Like pointers.
compound types that contain integral types? Or
No, just integral types and pointers.
Okay.
And it will be floats and doubles, which for me is great because we're doing lots of number processing. So you want to compute stuff at compile time. The floats specifically, we have like lookup tables or like filter coefficients or whatever. We're going to be have more powerful tools to do that, but it gets even better. So now we say, okay, these kind of integral types and floating point types, we call them structural types. And they can be non-type template parameters, but also any class that has only public members, which are of structural type, is a structural type itself and can also be used as non-type template parameters. So we can use a lot more classes as non-type template parameters with a model that makes a lot more sense than the model we had before. So now you can go and do compile time strings as non-type template parameters and all kinds of really, really cool stuff. So I think that was my personal highlight in terms of 20.
What was the hold up? Why were doubles and floats not allowed as non-type template parameters before?
So they're weird. So you can't really define a strict order on them, right? So how do you order a float, right? So you have all these weird things like nonce and infinity and so okay, so let me put it another way. So how do you if you have a non-type template parameter, right? What do you need to do? What the compiler needs to do is it needs to figure out whether two types are the same. Okay?
Right.
So if you have like specialization, you need to figure out if that's that specialization or, maybe the primary template. So the compiler has to compare these types all the time. So it needs to be able to really quickly determine whether two types, like templated types, are the same. So it needs to compare also the non-type template parameter values, right? But for floats, comparison is not really as well defined, right? Like that if you compare floating point numbers, you don't really do equals, right? Because they're not precise.
Right.
So there's a lot of problems. But yeah, we decided that we're just gonna do it anyway, and then maybe for some cases the comparison is maybe not going to do exactly what you think. But we have cases like this already where if you have like a atomic or float and you're going to do like a compare exchange there, it's not going to actually do floating point comparison. It's going to do bitwise comparison. So we kind of have that stuff already. For kind of meaningful values, it makes sense, and I think it's highly useful. Especially the thing that you can build classes with that as well and use them as well.
I think to break this down for our listeners, if you can correct me if I'm wrong. So so if I've got an array of int, that's the type template parameter. comma 5, that's a non-type template parameter. That's a value that says there's 5 integers in this array, right? And
Right.
we are extending that so that it's not just integral types that can go there. Now it's classes. It's whatever you want, basically.
Yeah, so you can write template double X class, whatever.
Okay.
Right.
And then you can write template widget X. And then widget is your own class, and then X is an instance of that class. It obviously has to have like a const X per... You need to be able to construct it at compile time, but basically you can... It's a weird way of like trafficking objects into a type via the type system. It's really, really powerful if you think about that.
Okay. All right, sorry to interrupt you. So that was your first favorite feature was extension of non-type template parameters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we didn't really vote any features as such into CppCast because the feature cut-off date is long gone.
Right.
So the rest of what happened in evolution, where I was most of the time, was kind of looking at these NB comments, like these bug reports, and then basically rejecting most of them because most of them were like pointing out stuff in like trying to change the design for like modules or coroutines. We made some small changes, but not too many. But the exciting stuff happens, I think, not with 20 because it's pretty much done. We're just fixing bugs, but more like with... So one day I spent in the Evolution Incubator, which is the group which reviews kind of future designs, possible designs which go into like CppCast 23 or maybe even later than that. And just does like a first pass on kind of more kind of really new and forward-looking features. And so I had a bunch of papers there myself, but also there were other papers from other people which I found really exciting. So we talked about epochs, which is Vittorio Romeo's proposal.
Right.
And then the one thing that also got me really excited was a proposal by Hal Finkel to introduce JIT to C++. I mean, this is very far like in the future, but we had a really interesting discussion about that. So basically what he's proposing, that you can take a template specialization and give it a template parameter which is a runtime value, and then it's going to go off and instantiate that parameter at runtime using like a JIT engine. And then you can basically compile code at runtime, and that's really, really powerful. But that's like very future-looking stuff. So in terms of CppCast 20, I think it was mostly bug fixes, NB comment resolution. That's what we were doing all week. So I don't have any exciting features to report.
So I'm looking at the trip report on Reddit, and it says the Evolution Working Group looked at about 100 national body comments, about half of which were from modules.
Yeah.
What types of bugs were the national bodies complaining about with regards to modules? And you said that most of them were rejected. You didn't see them as being true bugs. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, some of them were like proposed design changes, which we kind of can't really do at this point.
Okay.
There were so the modules day I was actually not in the room for most of the day, so maybe I can't comment on that too much. There were a few where people were pointing out, if you use like module is like a context sensitive keyword, but then if you use it in certain places it kind of breaks, or like other inconsistencies like that, which we did fix. So it's stuff like that, kind of small fixes.
So the national body comments, the national bodies, I guess, like we're just talking to Inbal about the Israeli national body getting started here. They can submit a comment and then it's reviewed, and if it gets rejected, like is there, I don't know how to phrase this, but does the national body have any power after that? Can they still say, no, we refuse to accept this unless you address this comment that we made or something?
All right. So now we're in this wonderful land of ISO rules and ISO procedures. So the way this works is basically we have, we published a committee draft, which happened after the last meeting in Cologne, and then all the national bodies get to submit their comments, and then we have 2 meetings like last week and one more in Prague in February to resolve them. And then at that point, the only thing they can really do is, so then after Prague, when we resolved all the comments, we published the actual international standard document.
Right.
And that goes for something that's called a national ballot, where all the national bodies can vote on the complete standard. But at that point, they only get to vote yes or no. So they can say, so what they can then do if they're really unhappy is they can vote down like the whole standard. That's basically the only thing they can do at that stage. But that has never happened, and I'm pretty sure it will never happen. So usually things are resolved, way before that. Like Herb is doing a great job as like running this whole thing, and he talks to all the national body heads, and he makes sure that really critical issues are discussed way in advance. So yeah, that's kind of the procedure.
Is that resolved on like a majority vote when the national bodies vote on the final draft, yay or nay? Like how does that work exactly?
I'm not entirely sure. Like
Okay.
you would need to ask Herb, but I think if one nation kind of objects to the standard, then it basically doesn't happen. Or I'm not
Oh,
sure what
okay.
happens. It never happened before, so I don't exactly know. But maybe we shouldn't go too deep into that.
Okay. That's fine.
We don't want that to happen. We want to release it.
Yeah, we want it to be unanimous. Yeah.
Everything. We want to have unanimous consent, and everything will be fine. And we all get to enjoy all these amazing new features that we've been working on for the last 3 years. So,
Well, I'm curious about your involvement in the evolution groups. Do you ever find it difficult to stay interested and excited in things that you know that you won't actually be able to use for 4, 7, 10 years or whatever?
yeah. Well, first of all, I don't think it's like that anymore. So I think with 20, we're gonna have, I think, all 3 major compilers supporting all the important features within a year or so. So they got a lot faster. So that's my prediction. The other thing actually is the other way around. Like sometimes I'm so excited about stuff that I come back from a meeting, I go back to my day job, and then I start coding, and then I'm using like a feature, and then I'm like, why does this not compile? And I'm like, oh, of course, because it's in 20. Like my compiler doesn't do that yet. Like it happened to me the other day with how you can take like decal type of a lambda, and you can like default initialize lambdas and things like that. And I just writing code, and then why does this not compile? And I was like, oh, of course, because we just talked about this, but it's not really a thing yet. And yeah.
Does your job allow you to work closer to the bleeding edge of compiler releases?
Yeah, so I'm quite fortunate. So we started writing like basically a new code base, a bit less than a year ago. So yeah, we're on 17, and so I mean, obviously we're cross-platform, so we need to like be on the whatever the subset is of the latest, Apple, Microsoft, GCC. But whatever that subset is, that's what we're using. So I think if all 3 major compilers are going to support 20, then probably we're going to jump to 20 if nothing comes out, which is like a deal breaker.
It's interesting you just said Apple, because I've been involved in some conversations recently on Twitter about how we kind of need to be treating Apple Clang as a 4th compiler, because it's really hard to tell what features it supports.
So I find that, I mean, I like a lot of stuff that Apple does, but that particular thing I find very frustrating. Like, for example, things like std variant or std optional. They're mostly like header-only types, but then they have like a couple of exceptions that they throw. Like they have like bad variant access and bad optional access, I think.
Right.
And they have to be defined kind of in a CPP file. Otherwise, you pull all this like vtables in your headers. And so then that doesn't compile on macOS. So on macOS, we don't have a variant and optional, because it depends on the dynamic library that the macOS, that ships with macOS. And so even though the compiler doesn't, if you just get Clang, it's all in there. Like you don't get that on a Mac. And so they're a bit behind. And in other things, they're just like doing things a bit differently. And yeah, we just kind of need to keep that in mind all the time. And that's can be a bit frustrating sometimes. But I guess they have reasons why they need to maintain that fork. And yeah.
And it does seem that they've started, or someone has started keeping track of Apple Clang features on CppReference reference if you look at the feature table. So that's at least something.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't aware of that. Yeah, I need to look at that table again. That's actually really useful. Thank you.
I think that was only just added in the last couple of weeks, because I swear it wasn't there last time I looked, and I went to ask someone to add it, and it was there, and I'm like, I don't think that I'm crazy, but anything's possible.
I wanted to go back to, you said you spent one day in the OOGI group, Evolution Working Group Incubator. We did have Vittorio Romeo on, I think 2 or 3 months ago, talking about his epochs paper. How did the committee take to his proposals?
So it was only seen by the incubator group, which is not
Right.
the committee. It's like a particular group of people who
Sure.
basically talk about like the newest proposals that are coming in and kind of vetting them before they go
Right.
to like the evolution group. So I think a lot of people like the idea. I think the community also likes the idea from what I've seen so far. There's quite a few problems with it. Like there is worries that we're going to end up in this kind of maintenance hell where, when we like make a new feature, then we need to worry that we need to make sure that it doesn't break like CppCast 17 and CppCast 14, and now we have to that kind of we get like another dimension on that axis. So like then we need to also worry about not like what epochs do we want to support, and there's like ways around that. You can say with the newest feature you only support the latest epoch or whatever, but yeah, it's not like obvious how to deal with that, and I don't think it's going to be the committee is. I think it's let me put it that way. I think it's going to be a controversial discussion when
Okay.
it goes to evolution. I don't think it's like straightforward kind of. I mean, on the one hand, yes, we have a lot of like old baggage in the language which everyone wants to get rid of, but on the other hand, we need to stay backwards compatible, and the committee is already kind of overworked. And how do we keep on track, and how do epochs fit in? And I don't know the answer to these questions, so I think it's going to be an interesting discussion.
Right. Right. And you say you presented some of your own papers to Oogie?
Yeah, I just had like a couple of small papers. So kind of my thing is, so I'm obviously interested in audio, so you have a proposal about that, which is a bit bigger, but most of the stuff that I do, I'm not one of the kind of smart guys who come up with like the big important feature. So what I do is like little things that kind of help clarify things or help fix things or make things more consistent, or like just little performance improvements that low latency people need or other people need. Like, so I had a paper about assumptions, portable assumptions, which kind of came out of the collapse of contracts because you know how you can, like, on some compilers you can say like built in assume and then some expression, and then the compiler is going to optimize based on that assumption.
Okay.
And then basically that was proposed. Then people said no, contracts are going to do that. Then it was proposed again, and then people said no, contracts are going to do that. Now contracts are kind of, okay, that's another story, but contracts are not going to happen soon. So now I went off and said, okay, now actually I'm going to think this through and try to like make this feature work on its own. So just have a way to express assumptions and inject them into the compiler. And I had a paper about that, which was well received. So I think it's going to go to evolution next time, and we're going to have a wider discussion about that. So that's going to be interesting. I had another one where, you know how some types, they have the same structure as arrays? Like with std complex, for example, there is this weird thing in the language that you can cast it to an array actually and pass it to like a C API or something.
Oh, I
But
didn't
then
know
for
that.
all
Okay.
other types, that it's a weird exception. It's just for std complex, and for all other types that have the same shape, it's like UB. You can't do that.
Right.
Like you can't just reinterpret cast it to something else. But then people do that all the time anyway. Like in audio, we have like SIMD packs, which we cast to floats or whatever. And then even in Qt, there's like a Qt color. The class Qt color, which is used all over the place, is like a union of like a struct with 5 ints and like an array of 5 ints. And that's all UB, but people are using it all the time. So I'm just trying to kind of clear up the object model in such a way that all the code that people are already using is actually fine. And we define what that means. And it's doing the right thing. And there was another paper which is also in that space, which I am not the author of. Christian Stasiowski is the name of the author, but he was not there, so I was kind of championing his paper, which was another one of those fixes where, did you know that, let me ask you a question. This is a nice quiz question. How do you print the bytes of an object? Like, let's say you have an int which has like 4 bytes.
Mhm.
How do you print those bytes? How do you implement a hex editor?
Well, you are allowed to observe that int as a character pointer. That is
Yes.
explicitly allowed. Then
Yes.
I would dump that straight to standard lib formats feature for dumping an array of bytes, and it would print it out for me.
Well, not quite, because the standard doesn't say that that chart points to bytes. It says it still points to the original object. What does it mean? It doesn't really mean anything. And because there is no array, you can't even loop through the bytes because you are like doing pointer arithmetic on something that isn't a range.
Okay.
So that's all just UB, and that's completely broken. And there's this paper which attempts to fix this. And so,
but it is
I mean, yeah,
explicitly
it's just a
allowed.
wording bug. What?
It is explicitly allowed to memcopy the bytes in and out of an object that is trivially copyable.
Memcopy, that's true. Yeah.
It says but it says as if with memcopy. It doesn't say memcopy is required.
So you can do it with memcopy. You can't. Yeah, if you call one of the other C functions, then yeah, but you can't just access the array
because it's not an array.
Because it's not an array. But people are doing it all the time, right? So this is we just need to fix that. And there's like all these like fixes in the object model. So there were two that we got in that other people did. So which are kind of in the same space. So we got CppCast from JS, which is one, which is really important, and we got. Oh, actually, that's something that happened in Belfast. So the other paper in that space is Richard's paper about what's it called? P0593. Basically, that you can objects kind of materialize. If you have like an array, you cast it to an object, and that object kind of springs to life. And you might get that paper into 20 actually, kind of as a last minute.
Really?
So then you can actually, what you can then actually do, you can memcopy, you can what's it called? Malloc. You can malloc a buffer and then cast it to, reinterpret cast it to like a widget, and then it's going to just be a widget. So that's also not going to be UB anymore.
You don't have to do a placement new there or anything.
Yeah, exactly. So that's another one of those fixes. There's like a bunch of papers in this space. Some of them are in 20, some of them are going to be hopefully in 23, and I'm kind of working on some of those and trying to kind of clean it all up.
That's a huge change if that gets into, or a huge deal if that gets into 20, I think. That changes a lot of things that I teach, basically.
I think Richard's paper is really important, and I'm happy that we might get it in, Not the library part, so he had like a thing where you can explicitly do that. It's now called start lifetime as, which is basically the drop-in replacement for the reinterpret cast that you would do before.
Right.
So we didn't get the library part in, but we might get the language part in, which is going to like just un-UB a lot of code.
Wow.
Yeah, check it out. It's a P0593. I think it's a really good piece.
The paper is Implicit Creation of Objects for Low-Level Object Manipulation. I'll make sure to put a link to this one in the show notes.
Yeah, I had a brief chat with Lisa about that too.
Yeah, it's scary low-level object model stuff. And I think most people shouldn't even be kind of aware of that, and they should just, do code that works. But under the hood, it's like really important cleanup stuff that's going on there. So.
Okay. You've mentioned your interest in audio a couple times. Did you attend the SG13 meeting, which is the Human Machine Interface Study Group? Yeah,
I spent a day there. So yeah, that's really exciting. So obviously that's my main interest because that's the industry I work in. It's like pro audio. So we had a paper on graphics, which is basically just another update of the existing graphics paper. Where we just had a few updates. People had comments, they responded to the comments, like a little API update. We had a paper about like WebView, and then there was no update of my audio paper this time. So I have this proposal together with Guy Somberg and Guy Davidson to actually standardize an audio API, which is kind of on the list of things that the direction group said, like, we need all the stuff in the library. So it's like networking and graphics and audio. And so we're trying to come up with a standard audio API. We've been working on that for quite some time now. So this time we didn't have an update on our paper, but we had another paper from Frank Birbacher about audio where he looked at our proposal and said, you know what, here's a few use cases that I don't think are covered by your current proposal. And we had quite a long chat about that in SG13. I think it was really interesting because I think we focused on low-level C++ kind of audio API, where like the motto is C++ is good at abstracting away from like hardware with low overhead, and you should be low level and just get like the minimum kind of like stuff to just basically push audio data to your sound card, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then that basically talks to the sound card. But then on a lot of devices, you don't get access to the device directly. Like on a phone, for example, you don't get to choose like, oh, I want this device, I want that device, I want this sample rate or whatever. So the operating system just does that all for you. So it's like higher level. So you just get to say, my app wants to output some audio. Here's like some audio data. And then the operating system kind of decides what happens with it. And then if you get like a call, then it kind of fades out automatically and this kind of stuff.
Right.
And in our API, you would have to do all that kind of yourself. And it's like on a phone, that's not really how it works, right? So it's like this kind of low level versus high level approach. And yeah, it's kind of unclear. Obviously I'm familiar with the low level stuff, but a lot of other people are not. And it's unclear what the right level is to go to the standard library. So I think with our proposal, we will definitely proceed, I think, to try to get it into Boost, like Boost Audio. But the standard stuff, I think we're gonna first have to have a chat about like what the right level is, like and we're doing now the same that we are doing with contracts, which is contracts got pulled last time. So now again, it's like unclear because there's too many people who want different things from this thing. So the same thing is happening with audio now, where the approach is, okay, you know what, let's just look at use cases. What do you want to use this feature for? It should be doing this and this and this and this, and these users need this for that, and these users need this for that. And then kind of get consensus on which of these use cases for which of these users we want to support in the standard library in the audio case, or like for contracts like in the language. And then try to get consensus on that first, and then go back to the actual design of the feature. With hopefully this debate then being kind of out of the way mostly. And I think that's a great approach. We're starting to do this more and more, just to focus on use cases on the committee. And I think it's a great approach. I really like that. That's a good way to get out of different opinions colliding, and different people want different things from the same feature.
Wow. It sounds, yeah, I mean, the graphics proposal ran into a lot of the same problems, it sounds like, too, right?
Yeah, they haven't started that process for graphics yet. I think they should maybe do that. But then also their API is like really mature, so I'm not sure how to approach this. They have wording and everything, so it's basically it's ready to go, basically, right?
Right.
So it's kind of stuck in the wheels of the committee because some people just don't think that this should be the right level. Yeah, I don't know where this is going. I'm following the progress, but I'm hoping it's going to go somewhere, because personally I think all the stuff belongs in the standard library, right? If you have like a high-level programming language, you get a laptop, you open up a compiler, you start writing some code. You need to be able to like draw a pixel on the screen, right? What's like the most elementary way, human interacts with software? It's basically you look at a screen, so you need to be able to draw something there. That's number one. Number two is you need to be able to receive input like mouse and keyboard or like touch or whatever. So you need input. And number three is audio, right? Because without that feedback, like imagine like a game without audio or any app without audio feedback. So I think these three things are like the fundamentals of human-machine interaction. And if we have none of them in the language, like we only have the terminal basically as the output, right? And like the file system. But then on the phone, you don't even have a terminal. So you can't literally write anything in C++ that runs on the phone without using non-standard kind of third-party stuff.
Right.
And I don't think that's right. So this is kind of, I think, kind of the overarching kind of theme here. But people disagree, so fair enough. Let's talk about it, and that's been going on for a while now.
Are there any existing cross-platform audio libraries that you're referencing when working on the audio proposal?
Sure, there is quite a few. I mean, we've been doing this like 20 years in the audio industry, right? So there's like Port Audio, there's Juice. There's quite a bunch of these kind of cross-platform APIs that are really mature, and what we are really trying to do is we're going to take like these APIs, which actually look kind of similar, like if it comes to like just the device I/O and the kind of the audio data, and just make them a bit more modern C++, and then do that. But then there is another problem, because now people who are not necessarily familiar with audio but are familiar with other kind of asynchronous-ish things like networking, they come to us and say, hey, this is not how you should be doing callbacks. We now have senders and receivers, executors and coroutines, which by the way is really exciting, and they're right. This is like a great way forward for like asynchronous stuff. And I'm really excited about, what Eric Niebler and Louis Baker and Kirk Shoup and a lot of other people are doing with like the sender and receiver stuff. And actually, quick interruption. Executors, they now actually agree on an executors design that they can actually explain to other people that actually makes sense. That's another first.
Oh, that's great.
Class. So that's a great thing forward. So that's all the stuff going on where we seem to be able to agree on a model how to actually do asynchronous stuff and callbacks in modern C++. But then they tell us, well, this is what you need to do in audio, but this is not what we have been doing for the last 20 years. If you take this stuff and take this to like audio developers, that's going to be not an API that they're familiar with. So that's not really going to be like standardizing existing practice. So I'm not sure that.
I mean, it just sounds weird to me. Like you said, you have 20 some odd years of existing best practices, but networking is asynchronous, audio is asynchronous, but I see a fundamental difference. Networking is never real time. Audio is basically always real time.
Right.
Yeah, so networking, there's like things like in networking, you can throw, and then you have like a nice mechanism how you can kind of capture that exception and like get it in the other thread. Like in audio, you can't throw, right? You have a callback, and then you have like a millisecond or like less to like fill a buffer with a bunch of numbers. Yeah. And if you fail to do that, then like there's going to be garbage numbers in the buffer, and they're going to go to the speaker. You're going to actually hear that, right? So then like your app is not going to work because you're going to get clicks and noise. So yeah, I think it's different, but like the idea of a callback is the same. So there is some overlap. But like how this callback is actually implemented under the hood is quite different, and the way you write code is quite different because audio is essentially real time, right? So when you're in this processing callback, you can't lock a mutex, you can't allocate memory, you can't do anything that takes like an unbounded amount of time, basically. So you need to be really careful about how you write code. And this is why we use C++, because C++ is, you can express things like that in C++.
And humans are, we're incredibly sensitive to this. If you get more than a 10 millisecond delay or something, people start to notice, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's the fascinating thing about audio. So like, in games, like, I mean, on the face of it, it's the same thing. Like games is like 2D instead of 1D, and their frame rate is lower, but then the data rate is higher, basically, right?
Right.
But there's one difference where if you drop like if you have like 60 frames per second, we have like 44,000 or 48,000 samples per second. So that's a lot more.
Right.
But then also if they have 60 FPS and one frame, they drop one frame, no one's really gonna notice, right?
No.
But like if you have an audio signal which you sample with like numbers, like 48,000 times a second, and like one of them is missing, and you have a little dip in there, you're gonna instantly hear that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a very different challenge. It's a very, very interesting field to work in, actually.
I wanted to just go back to something you mentioned there. The concurrency and parallelism study group says that they have agreed on their unified executors proposal for C++. So there were like a number of things kind of waiting on executors to be approved. So does that mean, we think we should get executors into C++ 23 now that they're all in agreement on this proposal?
Yeah, so I mentioned this briefly earlier. So we had like an evening session about that where they were like, here's what we think the design is. And they spent years on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So lots of people put a lot of work on this. And finally, they have a design where they had unanimous agreement in that study group that, this is the design we want to go forward with for C++ 23. I think that's the first time this happened. They had like unanimous agreement. Yep, we're fine with that. So now it's going forward. So I think now everything that depends on that is pretty much unblocked. So
great.
That's really good news. That's the other exciting thing that happened in Belfast. So it's not really for 20, which is why I didn't mention it in the beginning, but
right.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited about that. And like I'm struggling to get my head around all this new stuff, but so I sat down with some of the people who work there, and they kind of just talked me through it like in a pub in Belfast over a beer, and I was like, oh yeah, this actually makes sense. It's like sender and receiver stuff, and it's super fascinating. So I don't claim that I actually understand it yet, but it starts to make sense slowly. So I definitely recommend you check it out. I think it's really exciting stuff.
I was going to ask if it still made sense after the beer wore off.
That was just last week. I haven't looked at it since. So,
Okay. So as far as things that were actually accepted into 20 changes here, there's one thing that I have not been able to wrap my mind around, and I tried to read the paper on it, and made global initializers ordered between translation units when at least one of them is in a header unit or module interface. Now, it sounds at the surface that this is like dealing with the static initialization order fiasco, but I feel like it can't really be.
okay.
Are you familiar with that?
So the static initialization fiasco is the constant init paper.
Yes.
Which we have. That's done. That's
But
the paper you're referring
that
to.
doesn't change anything. You have to use the new feature to...
Yes.
Right.
So the paper you're talking about, I was not in the room for that. I'm just looking at that now.
P1874R1? Although I can't actually... Dynamic initialization order of non-local variables. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I wasn't in the room where that was discussed, so
Okay.
I can't really say anything about this paper.
Right,
but maybe I should check it out. Yeah.
Basic.start.dynamic is where things get changed. So maybe, yeah, people should read this and figure it out.
So the thing about the committee is that there's so much going on, and a lot of it is just way over my head. It's like modules specifically is something that I haven't been following in much detail. There's like all these streams of incredibly complicated things, and the survival strategy is basically you focus on those that you understand and your users care about, which is a bit, and then you have like a working understanding of some of it, and then some of it you just have to say, okay, I'm not getting into this now, because otherwise it's just too much. This has to be kind of your survival strategy if you want to be productive on the committee, because it's like so much stuff going on. I think we have now something like 12 groups sitting like in parallel talking about stuff. So it's actually quite overwhelming. So yeah, this is why I'm not familiar with that particular paper.
Yeah, that's fine. I didn't know if you would be. But on that note of all the different groups that exist, there's re-chairing of all the groups, which I find interesting. And then also a new working group or study group on ABI issues. I saw that somewhere in here.
Yeah, I should just make a show note that we're going to be talking to Titus Winters next week. So I figure we'll probably be talking a lot about the ABI stuff there. But do you want to just quickly talk about what you know about this new ABI group?
Yeah, so it started, like I became aware of this when I think Titus wrote an email on the committee mailing list a couple of months ago.
Yeah, it went Twitter.
Yeah, so then it kind of became public about like, what do we actually want to do? We're claiming that we want to be performant, but then we are, because we don't want to break ABI, we have all the stuff which actually isn't performant, and we are keeping it that way. Like, for example, unique pointer. A lot of people think that unique pointer has no runtime overhead. But actually it does, because it has a non-trivial destructor, which means you can't pass it in a register, which means that's an ABI thing, which means it's going to have some performance overhead. And we could change the rules and make it have no overhead, but that would be a breaking ABI change, which means not an API change, but an ABI change, right? So if you have a pre-compiled library, you wouldn't be able to link with that anymore. You would have to recompile that. And that's a problem in audio as well. Like we have, for example, some people who come up with like really clever, really cool algorithms for like pitch shifting or whatever, and they don't distribute the code; they just distribute the binary, right? And we need to just link against that library like forever. So we are at their mercy to recompile it, and so this is why ABI stability is really important. So he's saying, okay, are we now actually prioritizing ABI stability? Or are we prioritizing performance? Because these are clearly at odds with each other, and the committee has never said which one we prioritize. So he was kind of trying to force this discussion. And now so we're going to have a whole bunch of smart people. I think it's David van der Voorde, I think, is chairing this group. Okay. He's one of the experts. And they're going to spend time talking about it and figuring it out. And maybe there are things that can be done to kind of make both camps happy. So, I think it's important. It's an important discussion that needs to happen. So I'm really looking forward to what Titus is going to say about this on your next show.
Sure, it'll be an interesting one.
Yeah. Okay, so go ahead, David, Jason.
Well, I was going to say that the other thing I'd like to go back to, if you don't mind, is a proposal that you said that you submitted for, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the wording, but for saying assumptions, like that the compiler is allowed to assume this value is never less than 5 or whatever.
Yeah.
I was just curious what syntax that you proposed for that. If it's going to be attribute syntax like the contracts were supposed to be, or what?
I'm glad you asked. So the current what's published is P1774. I was kind of like, we have various options.
Right.
We discussed this, and now I'm going for the attribute syntax.
It
Not the one
sounds appropriate on the surface.
Not the one that contracts had with the colon, because the colon makes it not backwards compatible, because the colon is, you can't have a colon in an attribute. So I'm proposing a like proper attribute syntax where you have like square brackets, assume, paren, expression, paren, square bracket, and that's actually backwards compatible. So then old compilers at least can ignore it, right? The other option that was discussed was std assume, which would be nice because it would be consistent with std assume aligned, which is another proposal that I actually got into 20. So these are all basically standardizations of like intrinsics that already exist and people already use. But anyway, std assume doesn't quite work because it's essentially, it's like a keyword, it's like decal type or something like that, right? It's like an unevaluated context. So the thing in parens is not actually being executed ever. So the compiler is going to look into that. So if you say assume x greater than 0, the compiler is not going to actually evaluate x greater than 0 like in your code. The compiler is going to analyze it and say, well, okay, so, I might evaluate, I would be able to evaluate this maybe, and then if I were to do that and that would return false, then it would mean this and this, so I can assume that this is just not going to happen and optimize the whole program on that assumption. But that stuff is never actually evaluated, which is why function called syntax just doesn't work. And which is why we can't really have this in std, because then you would have something like a namespaced operator essentially, or like a namespaced macro keyword kind of thing. And we can't really do that. Like we briefly talked about this and it's just not going to work. I think the attribute syntax is a lot cleaner, a lot better.
I wonder how much, assuming that gets accepted, how much that might influence the future design of contracts as well.
So we also talked about contracts last week. But obviously now we are in the stage where it was kind of like a post-mortem session in a way, right?
Right.
Like now we are just looking at the use cases and a bunch of people are going to write papers like, which use cases are already supported in the language and, which proposals did cover which use cases and, how do we go forward, but not concrete new proposals yet. So what they're going to do, I think assume is useful. It's a very kind of sharp knife. It's a very low-level expert kind of feature. But it's useful as a hook into the compiler to inject information to the compiler. And I think it's useful as a standalone feature for like very kind of low-level stuff. And then if the contracts people, if they then say, hey, we found a way to integrate this with the contracts facility, and here's like a unified proposal, then I would be totally happy with that. That would be a good outcome. But what I don't want to happen is this thing that happened already twice, which is they said, oh yeah, don't do that because contracts are going to do it, and then they actually don't end up having contracts that can do that. Right. And so we then get neither of these things, and that's not good. And quite a few people are saying now that, assumptions and assertions are actually different things. Like even conceptually, the way you think about this, right? So one thing is like, here's the thing I want to check and maybe act on that check or maybe not check. So here's like a statement about, if this is false and my program has a bug, please do something about that. And this is, I think, what contracts are all about. But then assumptions are very different. Assumptions are, I know this is true because some other invariant somewhere else in my code are enforcing that. That's like just how my code works. I know this is true. And the compiler maybe would be able to even optimize on that, but it just can't see that bit of information because maybe it's a different translation unit or maybe the code is too complex. I'm just going to help the compiler out with like telling the compiler, hey, this is definitely true. Please optimize based on that. And I think assumptions and kind of assertions are two very, very different things. This is how I think about that.
Right.
Okay. So we've talked about, the OOGI, EWG groups that you attended some of their meetings. You went to SG13, talked about audio and graphics. Is there any other study group where you spent a decent amount of time that you wanted to talk about any progress they made?
Not really anything I was kind of deeply involved in. I think
Okay.
the rest was maybe the hallway track, where you go to lunch with people, or you go to dinner with people, or you go to the pub. Or like Belfast has amazing pubs, and the Guinness tastes a lot better than anywhere else. So you go there, and then you keep talking about this stuff, and this is where you create ideas. So now I came back with like a few ideas. We're like, oh, maybe we could write a proposal that does this or whatever. So that's like the other stuff that's always happening at these meetings, which is really exciting. But yeah, I think now I'm looking forward to Prague. That's the last meeting where we can fix things. And then at the end of Prague, we're going to be done with C++20, right?
Right.
So that's going to be a huge thing. It's going to be like definitely a reason to celebrate. And yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that. And yeah, getting all these features.
Just going back to the national body comments for one moment, did you address like half of them or address all of the ones that have come in so far and now the national bodies have like one more chance to write new ones? How does that work exactly?
So they only had one round of writing them, so that's kind of done.
Okay.
So now they just get to vote like yes or no on the whole standard.
Right.
But we didn't address all of them. So this is why we have two meetings, because there's a lot of them. It's like
Still have
literally
more to do.
So
Okay.
I think we did about 3/4 of them.
Okay.
And I think Herb actually wrote a report. I think he has like a pie chart. So I think we looked at about 3/4 of them, about half of those or even more we kind of rejected as like that's not a defect or that's a redesign, we can't do that at this stage. And then the rest was fixed, addressed, resolved. And then we still have, I don't know, something like, 70, 80 or 90 or something like that comments to process in Belfast. I don't know the exact number, but in Prague.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact number. So we did about 3/4 and we got another round in Prague for that.
Okay.
And then we're done, yeah.
And since you just mentioned the Prague Standards Committee meeting coming up, I feel like I should give a quick shout out to the Prague C++ meetup. We started the conversation with a discussion about the new meetup in Maryland. I'm going to be speaking at the Prague meetup in 2 weeks, and then in December, Chandler Kruth and you will be speaking. And then in February, they've got Tony, Van Eerd, Bjarne, and Herb speaking during the course of this committee meeting.
Yeah, shout out to Hanna Dushikova for organizing an amazing user group. So I don't know how she gets all these amazing speakers, but...
with the support of an amazing company, I would assume, because otherwise, yeah.
So yeah, definitely looking forward to that.
And since you mentioned Hannah, I was going to say, and since you mentioned Hannah, she is one of the people who is now a chair of one of these groups. She's going to be the chair of the reflection group, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she took over from Chandler actually.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, they're doing lots of very, very interesting work there as well. Yeah, and she took over as the chair. That's good news, definitely.
Okay. Jason, is there anything else you wanted to go over?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Timur, it was great having you on the show today. Thanks for telling us about all the Belfast news.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Good luck with meeting C++.
Yeah, it's 3 more days of C++ madness, and then I can finally go home and relax a little bit.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks.